One of the focus areas for the independent review on the NDIS was towards the sustainability angle of the NDIS and how far you can stretch the dollar and how far you can stretch the taxpayer to pay for the scheme. And then the biggest underpinning of is the pricing models and the pricing work you have done. Before you come to your insights, I want you to give a broad context of what Ability Roundtable does, and in terms of the richness of data you have, and then I want you to share your insights after that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Dev. And before I do that, though, just this idea of fixing the universal systems around the scheme is actually probably one of the most fundamental things to do, because that's actually where the scheme stops costing as much money as it does. And that gives you a lot more room to move in terms of the types of services that you are able, how you can actually fund the services that are really necessary for those who most need it. This is then kind of the NDIS sits as a cherry on the cake rather than being the whole cake as it is at the moment. So the Ability Roundtable is a benchmarking group. We've been benchmarking for about 10 years with disability service providers. We started out really to try and to work with organisations to use data to drive improvement and best practice in their organisations. So we've been going for about 10 years. We started out pretty small. We've been growing. We've now got about 70 odd organisations from around Australia participating, got about $6.3 billion worth of revenue that flows through the businesses that benchmark with us. So that when we talk about our data, you're actually getting a pretty good lens into at least the not-for-profit space, less insight into the for-profit space, but certainly in terms of the not-for-profit space, some really great insights. And I'll talk about that a bit in a minute, but just to come back to your question, yes, the report's not out, but we've been given some pretty hefty hints about what's likely to happen. And I wanted to start with what's not working, because they were pretty clear, the review is pretty clear that there are problems both with markets and with pricing. They're actually interrelated, but they wanted to make that point. And they particularly pointed out problems with thin and / regional markets. There really isn't a market when you don't have competition. So there's some places where talking about markets is almost not the right thing to talk about, and you have to start talking about commissioning and block grant funding. They said there's a problem with the price cap, because it basically means that there's one price that's set for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you've got higher or lower support needs, whether there's complexity or not complexity, whether you're in this location or that location, the price is the same. There's a two-tier market. They see there's a problem. That's regulated, registered, unregistered, regulated, unregulated. And that's a problem for them because, again, they're all getting the same price, but they've got different cost bases to them. It's a fee-for-service world out there. And what that basically means is you get paid the same amount of money no matter what you do. And so that encourages not over-servicing, but it encourages you to keep providing a service, and there's no differentiation. And the final one, which has been talked about here, is the open door of the scheme at the moment, because there is nowhere else for people to go. All of these things are distorting markets, and when you overlay the pricing on top of that, it becomes a problem. Our benchmarking data kind of reinforces that. So in that group of 70 benchmarking organisations across the different benchmarking products, 2/3 of them have had a loss for the last 3 years. Wow. So a third of the people in this room are probably making money. 2/3 of you are losing money. That's a lot of people losing money. And that actually smells to me a bit like market failure. So there's a real concern there because of that. 3 years in a row. If you're in therapy, support coordination, by and large, it's worse. Core supports, still 2/3. But in therapy, it's more like 80% are losing. So this is huge. And the other thing we know in the data is that if you're small, you're more likely to make money. The moment you're above about $15 million, and that's not big in the broader scheme of things, but maybe for a lot of people here that you'd be going, $15 million would be great, thank you. But for our sector, that's pretty small. And what that means is there's a lot of medium to larger players who are at significant risk. So that's what that benchmarking data is showing, that reinforces this issue of price. Quickly, on the pricing model, we've got two pricing approaches. In core supports, there's this thing which is called the Disability Support Worker Cost Model. And that's a formula that's used to try and work out price. That formula is no longer working. It's broken. And it's broken for the reasons that the review was flagging before. One price for everybody. There's not great data out there to actually inform it. It's 10 years old. It's time to change. And then you turn to therapy and support coordination, they don't have a price, they don't have a cost model there. They use a parallel market approach where they're just going, okay, what's happening in accident insurance? What's happening in aged care? And they set a price. That price has got no evidence base that it actually works for people with a disability. And for some, if you've got low support needs, it may be too high. For people who've got very high support needs, it's probably too low. Again, that problem of having one single price and a price that's not really evidenced. So these are all the things that the NDIS review has been looking at. These are the kinds of things they're trying to solve. I can talk a bit about where I think they're going to go. I'm looking to
We'll
Dev.
conclude with that. We'll conclude on that.
Okay.
We'll come back on that.
Okay, I'll conclude on that. Yeah, good.